Welcome back to News in Focus. Now, activists want government to declare the national state of emergency over the gender-based violence and femicide crisis that is impacting the country. Protesters marched to the union buildings in Pretoria on Friday. The demonstration was led by the organization Women for Change and was joined by other civil society groups. They are calling for swift and tangible measures to tackle the scourge. Joining me now from Women for Change, I'd like to welcome its spokesperson, Bulelwa Adonis. Bulelwa, good day. Thank you so much for joining us on News in Focus on Hilaal TV.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, it's an absolute pleasure. I think, Bulelwa, we saw quite a large number of people really attending this march, and I guess it deserves all the attention given that over the last 2 weeks we've really seen two cases of gender-based violence really taking a notch, really taking an ugly step. That, of course, of 7-year-old Twetwe and the prosecution or the lack thereof when it came to Omotoso. From your engagement on Friday, do you feel that there's a sense of urgency, a sense of seriousness from government's perspective in tackling gender-based violence?
I think the dissatisfaction in the crowd from the audience towards the, Steve, who received our, from the presidency, Deputy President Steve, who received our petition and our handover. When Steve spoke, the dissatisfaction, the rage, the anger was a clear portrait that people are angry, people are unsatisfied, people have no trust in the government. So do I think that there's an urgency from their side? I mean, we're thankful that there was a representative to receive our petition, but all in all, towards this fight, it doesn't feel like there's a seriousness. It doesn't feel like it's taken seriously enough. I mean, it has to take events like these. It has to take those two cases that you mentioned, for example. The build-up of GBV getting worse and worse and worse, and cases worsening for us to get to a point of having such demonstrations in order for us to be heard by some people. So, in summary, no.
Yeah. Bulelwa, to that also, we've seen the frustration when it comes to prosecutions. We've seen, of course, like I mentioned 2 weeks ago, where Omotoso and those accused with him were found not guilty. And there was, of course, a whole line of documents, against him, a whole line of victims, a whole number of victims, many women saying, well, this is really as unfair as it can get. From an NPA's perspective, from a South African Police Service perspective, of course, the South African Police Service can do the actual arresting, but it's the prosecution. Talk to us about that frustration and what was seen during this march, the fact that we've got prosecuting authorities who either drag their feet or nothing comes at it at all.
I think that case in particular was very enraging. It was disheartening because it shows that irrespective of us having good legislation, people going the normal route, the legal route, the right way, as some people would say, and getting convictions like what was received with the Omotoso case is very disheartening because it tells you, is our justice system equipped enough to assist victims and survivors of gender-based violence and femicide? It asks the question, is our justice system in favor? Is there a seriousness? Is there an urgency? Is there an empathetic approach when in terms of such cases? So I think it's very disappointing. I think that case in particular is one I will never forget myself in particular. Because the outcome enraged not only obviously the victims and survivors, but it enraged the entirety of the country because it questions, it leaves a huge question mark for our justice system. Like, can we trust this? Is this justice system so-called just?
Bulelwa, the big question when it comes to educating a boy, educating a man, becomes of utmost importance. And I guess this is the one way of really trying to assist in whatever way possible of curbing gender-based violence. But surely there comes a point where a man needs to become a man and realize his responsibilities, realize that he needs to take the lead in protecting a woman. He needs to take the lead in making sure that a woman is protected at all times, and that he can play that role in making sure that it doesn't necessarily need the education. Of course, that would be important. But saying, it's time for me to step up and be a man, and by me being a man, I can play my role in really helping women in making sure that this scourge becomes lower and lower. How important is that? Just going beyond the educational perspective, but the man knowing what he needs to do, his duty towards protecting a woman.
Sure. I think what you said is so important. I think it's something that's completely overlooked. I think there's a reason why rape culture is so prevalent in our society. I think it's actually it's disheartening. I completely understand when activists get exhausted because it almost feels like women and children in particular who are predominantly victims of this pandemic. It feels like despite us being victimized by this, that we still have to be the individuals who come up with solutions and educate our men. When in actuality, what you said is exactly it, and it's disheartening that what you said is not a common thought. It's not I don't know, rational thinking to some people. So absolutely, yes. I think it would make a huge difference in our country, in our society, if our men decided to stand up and say, you know what, I as a man care about my fellow sisters, you know, my fellow neighbor. I always stress about that there's power in being a neighbor. I really, it irritates me, the narrative of what if it was your mother or your sister or your cousin. No. If as a human being, as a man, what is your duty? What are you going to do about this scourge? What are you going to do about this pandemic? What in your power are you going to change in your behavior? How are you going to arise as a leader, as a man, you know, in your irrespective right? And how are you going to create a change towards this pandemic? So it's unfortunate that we can't evoke and force such ideologies, because you would assume that a normal-minded human being would think like this, but unfortunately that doesn't seem to be the case.
One final question, Bulelwa. Last year we saw the anti-GBV bill being signed into legislation. And I think what is frustrating when I speak to a lot of the advocacy groups like yourself, their frustration is it's just a piece of paper, because this legislation is not going to stop a man from committing a rape. It's not going to stop a man from assaulting a woman. It's not going to stop a man from going ahead and committing heinous sexual crimes. It's not going to do that. It's just a piece of paper. And this is the question when it comes to this. How much does this bill now need to become more than just a piece of paper? And how much does government really need to stamp its foot even harder to make sure that perpetrators of gender-based violence are brought to book, so that it justifies the legislation that has been signed, which of course occurred last year, right at the start of Women's Month?
I mean, the conversation we should be having is, how many good systems do we have in play in this country? We have one of the best legislations in the world, number one. We have all of these good systems. You know, you just mentioned this this bill that was signed in. There is the GBF policy, the NSP that we can talk about, that was signed into law back in May of 2020. That's 5 years back. You know, these are just primary examples of the fact that, you know, there's so many good things on paper, but unfortunately, in reality, our stats are still rising. Our femicide rates are still increasing. You know, we're still rape capital of the world. So irregardless of the good legislations, irregardless of all of these new bills being signed into power, the question is implementation. The question is accountability. The question is, are we going to fund these bills? Are we going to fund the NSP and things like that? The question is, even like, you know, your GBF fund, the GBF council, all these different things, all of them are there, but is there implementation of them? Is there accountability held towards them? That's the real question to this.
Bulelwa, thank you so much for joining us here on News in Focus on Hilaal TV. Much appreciated.
Thank you for having me.
That's Bulelwa Adonis, who is the spokesperson for Women for a Change. Well, that's all we have for you here on News in Focus on Hilaal TV. From myself, for Hospital, and the rest of the TV Johannesburg. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.